This is TJ, dedicating the song to Lead Belly.
Whoa, Black Betty, whoa.
In 2002, international pop star Tom Jones gave a shout-out to one of the most influential musicians in the 20th century. It's hard to know what Lead Belly would have made of such a tribute, though he loved this song, and he certainly loved women. Lead Belly had a hard life, born poor and black in a time and place that expected little from him, and gave even less in return.
You're talking about any message in the Lead Belly story, it's called survival.
But his hard work and phenomenal talent built a musical legacy that lives on.
I think the spirit of the songs that Lead Belly did is indestructible.
He made hundreds of recordings that have inspired generations of musicians. From the Weavers and Van Morrison, to the Beach Boys, the Animals, and Lonnie Donegan.
George Harrison said, if there was no Lead Belly, there wouldn't have been any Lonnie Donegan. No Lonnie Donegan, no Beatles. Therefore, no Lead Belly, no Beatles.
There is a house in New Orleans.
He sang about good times, hard times, and pretty much anything in between.
His power, his passion, it just shot out of the speakers and it touched you.
I was like, wow, this is blowing my mind.
He became, against all odds, a kind of worldwide influence in music. I mean, he was a genius. He was a genius, and pay attention, you know?
Anybody should ask you people who made up this song, tell them you didn't let better, you done been here and gone.
Hootie Ledbetter was the grandson of slaves, born in January 1889, just 24 years after the Civil War. Today, his family live a life that he would barely recognize.
Everybody in our family here, you know, we're all people who are achievers.
He had everything against him as far as discrimination, as far as age, but he still achieved despite all of that.
And so we're all influenced by Lead Belly, and every time, you know, we feel like, you know, it's getting a little tough, we just look at Lead Belly.
The winter went and I went a roading down on when he was doing a little broken. Every time you turn around, he said it's so funny. You can't lose a Miss Charlie.
If you go to some of the railroads in Texas or Louisiana, you think, wow, you know, is this the railroad that Lead Belly and Blind Lemon jumped off the train at? That railroad is still there, and the music is still there.
The region near the new family home has frequent reminders of the days when Hootie Ledbetter was growing up.
Can't lose a Miss Charlie. Can't lose a Miss boy.
His father rented a farm with his wife, Sally, who was half Cherokee. Their life was precarious.
Racial tension was at an all-time high. The Ku Klux Klan became a very, very viable and popular group during that time. And that world was a violent world. That world was a harsh world.
Well, he was fighting snobbery and racism from the day he was born.
Racism was rampant because there was this palpable anger all across the South about the loss of the war. It lost their way of life because of people they felt didn't even deserve the freedoms that they had won.
Your innocence is lost, you know, early on.
But Hootie's parents were determined to give him a good start if they could. And he attended school from the age of 8 to about 12 before he went to work in the fields.
His family had a farm that he grew up on, and his father always raised him to be very independent.
You can't lose a Miss Charlie. You can't lose a Miss boy.
His family didn't have much, but they did have music.
Then there's this other side of him learning the guitar. So his uncle taught him to play the guitar, the 6-string guitar.
Many of the songs were passed down from generation to generation, the words and song titles often changing. Lead Belly would become a potent link in this musical chain. Gallus Pole tells the story of a condemned prisoner waiting to see if his family can buy his freedom.
Son, I brought some silver, son, I brought some gold, son, I brought some everything. Keep him together for Lord.
It's based on a Hungarian story with variations traced to Finland, Sweden, Britain, and Germany.
Bring me, keep him together for here come his mother.
In 1963, Judy Collins recorded her version of the story, Anathea.
Anathea, Anathea, don't go out into the forest. Well, it's a horrible story. It's about sexism and it's about powerful men and what they get away with. You will find your brother hanging. I think it's a very poignant song, and it's also very powerful, and it still is kind of riveting and upsetting to people, which I like. I think people need to be disturbed, but it's real life, and I don't think that people actually get off their, rear ends and do things unless they are upset about things.
Gallus Pole is just one of the hundreds of songs Lead Belly picked up. He was a wandering song magnet with a remarkable talent for recall, a songster.
He was really like a human jukebox.
He would go around, he would hear something once, somebody singing a song somewhere, and then he would commit it to memory.
And then he would just, if it's a song he liked, he would work on it right away, put it together. And then he might work in a verse from another song he liked.
It was like the tape recorder in Lead Belly's head kind of kicked in.
In his early teens, at the start of the 20th century, Lead Belly started earning money playing for local dances and busking in Louisiana. And as singer Valerie June recalls from her busking days, that can be a hard school.
Nobody's gonna put any money in that box if you don't have a good song going. So I think that it would have been the same for Lead Belly at that time. If he'd written a new song or something and he hit the street, he would know whether he had a winner or not based on that.
But Lead Belly did get some money in his hat, and in his late teens he traveled around Louisiana and Texas, living off a mix of his music and farm work, basing himself in Shreveport, where he wrote his song, Fannin Street.
Fannin Street was the street where the whorehouses are down in Shreveport.
When Lead Belly was 12 or 13, he would drive into Fannin Street with his father in the back of a wagon. And he would say to his father, what are those women?
And he says, no sooner did I put my long pants on than I was out the door. And I went down to Fannin Street to the Bauhaus. That's what they called it, the Bauhaus. This song's about that.
Follow me down, follow me down, follow me down by Mr. Tom. My mama told me, my little sister too, when on Fannin Street, son, they're gonna beat her.
I'm sure he had a very tough time, making money and stuff for music, but, you can hear in his music that he's a pretty happy guy, I mean, when he's playing, he's happy, and that's what makes the music good. Follow me down, Mr. Tom. For one thing, I think he was the first guy to use the 12-string guitar. To me, that's, when I think of Lead Belly, I think of that 12-string guitar and his sound, and he could really play it, too.
Anybody should ask you people who made up this song.
You tell them Robbie Kriegel been here and gone.
Lead Belly adopted the 12-string because it produced a big sound that would fill a barroom and get him heard. But it was, and is, a difficult instrument to master.
It sounded like multiple guitars to me, or even like maybe orchestra in the background. It sounded bigger strings, like it encompassed the room more, basically. It filled up the room.
Man said to the old lady, what do you think of that? I got one of them bold people out of my Dutton hat.
I don't know. He gets his emotions into it more. You can actually hear it coming out, and he kind of, abuses it almost. He slaps it. So it gets a little more boomy and out there, and I don't know. He makes it work for sure.
Cody recently wrote a tribute to his hero, Lead Belly.
One of the reasons why it's not as popular today is because it's very difficult. It's a hard instrument to play. It's now become almost identified with two people, either Roger McGuinn or Lead Belly.
Roger McGuinn, lead guitarist of influential 60s band The Byrds, found early inspiration in Lead Belly.
I remember Goodnight Irene from listening to the radio back around 1949, 1950. My grandparents had one of those big old wooden radios that was like a floor model. I went down to the south side of Chicago and got a 12-string, just like Lead Belly. And then I had to learn Lead Belly songs to go along with it. Bring me a little water, Sylvie. Bring me a little water now. Bring me a little water, Sylvie. Every little once in a while. Don't you hear me calling, Sylvie? Don't you hear me calling now? Don't you hear me calling, Sylvie? Every little once in a while.
Bring me a little water, Sylvie. Bring me a little water now. Bring me a little water, Sylvie. Every little once in a while.
I think the spirit of the songs that Lead Belly did is indestructible.
Don't you see me coming?
In 1912, Lead Belly was 23 and living in Dallas, where he teamed up with the young street musician Blind Lemon Jefferson, soon to become one of the first blues artists on the Paramount label. Blind Lemon's fast and complicated guitar style pushed Lead Belly's musicianship to a whole new level of sophistication.
There's a difference between playing technique and telling a story with your instrument. He had the ability to tell a story with his instrument.
When we pick cotton, you got to jump down to pick a bale of cotton a day. You can't fool around. And we sing, Great God Almighty, I can pick a bale of cotton. Great God Almighty, I can pick a bale a day. Great God Almighty, I can pick a bale of cotton. Great God Almighty, I can pick a bale a day. Oh Lord, I can pick a bale of cotton. Oh Lord, I can pick a bale a day. Oh Lord, I can pick a bale of cotton. Oh Lord, I can pick a bale a day.
Blind Lemon is one of his great influences, and Blind Lemon is is like the Johann Sebastian Bach of the blues. And so elegant and so intricate and so complicated, these guitar parts. And Lead Belly plays like that. And you can hear this complex fingering and this incredible sort of arpeggios and, Baroque phrasings coming through Lead Belly from the influence of Blind Lemon. So he's like a window into this glorious past.
He actually did pick cotton for a while, when he was younger. That obviously didn't appeal to him as a career option.
What Lead Belly was also trying to do with this particular song was to portray sort of the monotony, the hardship, and machine-like process of picking cotton.
Oh Lord, I can pick a bale of cotton. Oh Lord, I can pick a bale a day. Oh Lord, I can pick a bale of cotton. Oh Lord, I can pick a bale a day. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of day. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of day. Oh Lord, I can pick a bale of cotton. Oh Lord, I can pick a bale of day. Oh Lord, I can pick a bale of cotton. Oh Lord, I can pick a bale of day.
Lead Belly's song Cotton Fields also recalls the back-breaking work of his childhood.
When I was a little baby, my mother, she would rock me in the cradle. And them old cotton fields back home, it was down in Louisiana, just a mile from Texarkana. And them old cotton fields back home. Now when those cotton bolls got rotten, you couldn't pick very much cotton.
However, the ever-creative Lead Belly did take a geographical liberty with the lyrics.
He didn't grow up a mile from Texarkana, but it rhymed, I guess. But I mean, it's about the old cotton fields back home, so that song's really about where he came from. It's something that's his alone.
In them old cotton fields back home.
There is a house in New Orleans, they call the rising sun. Have been the ruin of a many.
Eventually, Lead Belly traded the hardships of the cotton fields for a tough life in Shreveport's Fannin Street bordellos. The misery he saw there was captured in the song House of the Rising Sun.
I do think he is singing from his life experience. I think that is his way of telling his story, and I think he did it really well. And I think that beside being a performer and being a singer, I think he was also a teacher.
Did it be so young, so foolish and so wise? I let her ramble lead me astray.
In 1964, English band The Animals were on tour with Chuck Berry and wanted a standout song for their opening set.
Oh, mother, tell your children not to do what I have done. Spend your lives in sin and misery in a house they call the rising sun.
Their appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show helped take the song to the top of the U.S. charts, achieving a level of commercial success that would have been inconceivable to Lead Belly 50 years earlier.
In New Orleans, they call the rising sun. And it's been the ruin of many a boy. And God, I know I'm one.
It wasn't long before life on Fannin Street took its toll on Lead Belly, too.
You don't move around in that environment and not be accused of trying to take somebody else's wife or doing something else that's disrespectful. And if you're gonna be a part of that community and that culture, you'd better know how to fight.
In 1915, aged 26, Lead Belly was convicted of assaulting a woman in a saloon and carrying a pistol. He was sentenced to 30 days hard labor on the chain gang.
And these people in the South were bent on putting black people back in their place, so to speak. And they created all kinds of black code laws, later became known as Jim Crow laws.
During those time periods, the American justice system was very unfair, and it was very unequal. And so many black men would be arrested without any representation or without any fair jury or judges.
They were, in most instances, treated very, very badly. They were forced labor.
To clear the levees, to work on the railroads, to do these kinds of things, heavy labor.
Take this hammer, carry to the captain. Take this hammer and carry to the captain. Take this hammer, carry to the captain. You tell him I'm gone.
It was nothing more than legalized slavery.
In 1917, aged 28, he was sent to prison again, this time for murder, after shooting his cousin's husband over a woman.
In prison, he was ensconced. It was like he was in the middle of the volcano.
Lead Belly escaped, but was recaptured after a year and sentenced to 35 years in prison. But his spirit didn't falter, and he soon put his musical skills to a very practical use, writing a song to Governor Pat Neff, pleading for his release.
If I had you, Governor Neff, like you got me, I'd wake up in the morning and I would set you free.
He made a simple statement in a musical tune towards one listener. And that, to me, shows Lead Belly's skills.
I know my wife will jump and shout when the train rolls up and come stepping out.
The governor released him after he heard the song, but in 1930, Lead Belly got into another fight at a Salvation Army concert. This time, he was sentenced to 6 to 10 years in Louisiana's notorious Angola prison for assault with intent to kill. He was now 41 years old.
Angola was the most notorious prison in America. He was a tough guy in one of the toughest prisons in America.
A tough guy who by now had earned a tough guy nickname, Lead Belly.
I love that quote of Woody Guthrie's about a hard name for a harder man. At the same time, he was a human being, and obviously it's a universal story of challenge and triumph.
When you get up in the morning, when that big bell rings,
By all accounts, life at Angola was harsh.
you meet the same old thing, knife and fork on the table, ain't nothing in my pan.
By day, the men toiled on the plantation. At night, they longed for escape on the passing train.
Shine a light on me, let it midnight special, shine a heaven light on me.
You could feel that pain and suffering coming through the music, and somehow that touches you as a human being. But I think that it's impossible to really understand what these artists went through. I mean, all of the black artists in the early part of the 20th century suffered greatly.
Decades later, Lead Belly's performance reached a young musician half a world away. In 1967, Celtic star Van Morrison had a hit with his own version of the song.
Well, the first memory is that my father had several LPs. There was one of the Belly Last Sessions. The only thing I could identify with his story. Identified with the sound and the voice and the songs. It was a wide range of songs. You know, the voice, the sound of the voice, the guitar, anyone interested in singing. It was very powerful stuff.
But you can bet your bottom dollar, Lord, if it's chain gang bound, chain gang bound. Let the midnight shine, shine, shine.
So I guess I was at the right place at the right time, sort of thing.
This is what makes music making, in a sense, survive throughout the generations, where people can take elements of a song that they heard and that they love and try to create something of their own.
In 1933, a man named John Lomax arrived at Angola. He was a Harvard academic with a grant to record folk music in the field, which in those days required a lot of heavy lifting.
When the Lomaxes went out to record, they were carrying 300 pounds or more of equipment in the back of their Ford. And, you know, it's hard to imagine lugging that stuff around and even being able to make those recordings.
You can imagine John and his son pulling up at a prison. I mean, it must have been quite an operation, but they did a fantastic job.
And then, of course, you only had a limited amount of media. You know, now we can put hours and hours of material on an SD card or a flash card.
There were many musicians at Angola, but on the fourth day, Lomax wrote in his journal, "We found a Negro convict unique in knowing a very large number of songs, which he sang effectively while he twanged his 12-string guitar. With the help of his 18-year-old son, Alan, John Lomax set up the portable Presto recorder and got to work."
Irene, good night.
One of the songs Lead Belly played for them was Good Night, Irene. It was the first time this song was ever recorded.
Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I get you in my dream. Sometimes I live in the country.
The Lomaxes soon departed, leaving Lead Belly to finish his sentence at Angola. But in 1934, he was released for time served. It was the height of the Depression, and prospects for a former convict were few. Lead Belly appealed to the Lomaxes for help, and they hired him as a recording assistant, valet, and driver as they continued visiting jails across the South.
He actually learned a lot of his songs on those trips. I mean, I remember there was a place called Cummins State Farm in Arkansas, a prison, and Lead Belly learned, there's a guy, Kelly Pace, a prisoner, and a group of prisoners singing Rock Island Line. And that's where he first heard it, and he memorized it, of course, and took it home and worked out the guitar part, and that became his.
For the Rock Island Line, it's a mighty good road. For the Rock Island Line, it's a road to ride. For the Rock Island Line, it's a mighty good road. If you want to ride, you got to ride it like you found to get your ticket at the station on the Rock Island Line.
In 1955, British superstar Lonnie Donegan recorded Rock Island Line. It went to the top of the charts in both England and America.
She's a mighty good road. Oh, well, the Rock Island Line, she's a mighty good road. The Rock Island Line is a road to ride. Yeah, the Rock Island Line, she's a mighty good road. And if you want to ride, you got to ride it like a find to get your ticket at the station on the
Donegan's team didn't seem to fully understand Lead Belly's role as arranger of the version their man sang when they visited Lead Belly's producer Moses Ash in New York.
Some guys came from England into his office and like, so who is this Lead Belly fellow that is stealing my man Lonnie Donegan's music? And Ash threatened to break all the records over their heads if they didn't leave.
Lead Belly also picked up Black Betty during his prison days.
Oh, Black Betty, bam-ba-lam, oh, Black Betty, bam-ba-lam, Black Betty, bam-ba-lam.
Though like many of his songs, the original meaning has become obscured over time. Tom Jones recorded his version in 2002.
This was a work song, so it's kind of funny. You see like these rock and disco-y versions of Black Betty, where all there's the three backup singers going sham-de-lam.
Oh, Black Betty, bam-a-lam. Oh, Black Betty, bam-a-lam. Oh, Black.
In the original song, it was used a hammer, an axe, an axe as a cutting song. You go to like sporting events in the United States and people are singing in the audience and dancing around. No idea it's a prison song.
Thank you, Lead Belly.
John Lomax believed that the Lead Belly prison story was good for publicity.
Just once more, Lead Belly.
Irene, good night.
Lomax persuaded him to recreate the original recording session for a promotional film. Today, the footage depicts a relationship we find hard to understand.
That's fine, Lead Belly. You're a fine songster. I've never heard so many good Negro songs. Thank you, Sir Ball.
Back then, it would remind Lead Belly of a time he hoped to put behind him. In the winter of 1934, John Lomax and Lead Belly finally arrived in New York. The New York Herald Tribune announced his arrival with the headline, "Sweet singer of the Swamplands, here to do a few tunes between homicides." Lomax now set out to promote his discovery.
It was more like he's presenting King Kong, We got this wild beast, in chains, and he's going to sing for you, and he's going to do these miraculous things, and the audience is all out there, waiting for the spectacle to happen.
He was willing to do whatever was required within limits, and John Lomax pushed the limits by asking Lead Belly to wear prison stripes, and at one point he said, "Enough of this."
It's like, hey man, I don't want to go on stage looking like that, boss. I mean, I want to look sharp. I mean, I've been in prison all these years. They got these women in Harlem. I can't even go around Harlem looking like this. Well, he's lucky Lead Belly didn't take a bottle and go back to prison, you know what I mean? Because I'm sure Lead Belly thought about it a time or two.
But the impact of this humiliating treatment must have been softened by his marriage in January 1935 to his longtime girlfriend, Martha Promise. They would be together for the rest of his life.
Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. Good night,
A few blocks away from their old East Village apartment lives John Reynolds.
Hey,
Much of
come
his
on in.
life has been dedicated to researching Lead Belly's story and promoting his music. He befriended Martha in her later years.
I thought they were like bullet holes in the door downstairs, but the door did look pretty shabby, and I knocked, and the guy opened the door just a little bit and said, "Oh, she's up on the top floor." Martha kept everything All the things that Lead Belly brought back from his different trips, she saved everything and folded it neatly and placed it in her trunk. This is my main Lead Belly file. Everything is neatly organized. Several files for Texas, the Lomax, all the different cities where Lead Belly performed. I saw the trunk in the basement. It was filled with, it was real treasure trove.
One letter from Martha to Hootie finishes, "How did you like the airplane ride? I am a little lonesome here sometime. I have everything straight, and you won't have anything to do but sleep and eat when you come home. So long, your little lonesome wife, Martha."
She was just nuts about Lead Belly, and he was nuts about her. I mean, he said, "My wife is half my life, my guitar is the other half."
While Lead Belly's personal life was finally coming together, his relationship with the Lomaxes was fast falling apart. Just a few months earlier, Lead Belly had signed over 50% of all his earnings to John Lomax and given him credit for his work. It wasn't an unusual arrangement for the time.
The Lomaxes put their name on many of the songs that were attributed to Lead Belly, but so did Colonel Tom Parker with Elvis Presley, and even Heartbreak Hotel. Elvis had nothing to do with writing it, but he got a writer's credit. And so that was going on then.
I think it's incredibly difficult to look at their relationship and put it into any kind of modern-day context. We would find the way they treated him completely unacceptable today.
I think John and Alan were using Lead Belly, but I think Lead Belly was using John and Alan as well.
If Lomax hadn't, discovered him in prison and supported his career and promoted him, he probably would have never gotten out of Louisiana.
I met Alan Lomax when he was very old, but just briefly. I think that maybe they were doing what they thought was the right thing at the time, but clearly it wasn't.
I think in some ways the world would be worse if John Lomax had not done what he did, because he bought vernacular music, folk music. He bought it uptown. He exposed it to a public that would not have been exposed had he not done what he did.
The Lomax's relationship with Lead Belly helped both of them. Because when you look at Alan Lomax's career, of how he ended up discovering Muddy Waters and Mississippi John Hurt and so many other musicians, it started with Lead Belly.
Lead Belly managed to extricate himself from the Lomax contract. But more generous terms don't amount to much when records don't sell, however good they sound.
Alice people downtown, she was having her loving fun. Let me tell you what Bill Martin done. The deed that Bill Martin done. First degree murder with a Colt 41.
Record companies were finding it hard to neatly fit Lead Belly's music into an existing marketing category.
I mean, it doesn't really matter whether it's folk or blues. I think Lead Belly was kind of a category almost unto himself.
Lead Belly didn't limit himself to blues or any genre. He did all the genres.
One young singer who has found the multicultural market that eluded Lead Belly is Valerie June. Much has changed in 80 years, but her 2014 stripped-back style is very reminiscent of the early Lead Belly field recordings. For her, a good song transcends categorization and belongs to everyone.
Nobody took anything from us in the world of music. Like, we needed to get away from certain memories. Like, sometimes when I'm listening to a hip-hop song and I'm listening to the dark, dark lyrics, it reminds me so much of listening to the old blues guys, because that stuff can get really dark. What I think it is more that white people appreciate the blues music that was being made at that time so much that they want to learn how to play it too.
What ended up getting lost in translation about our culture and our music when it comes to folk and blues, jazz, rock and roll, or whatever, is that this music came out of Louisiana, and the blues is not the Oxford Dictionary definition of melancholy, sad, depressed, all these kind of things. African Americans in New Orleans, I mean, we did not invent the sad song. We did not invent the melancholy. We invented Saturday night. Saturday night was invented in Louisiana.
Her name is Josie, and she ain't so nosy. Her name is Josie, she ain't so nosy. Her name is Josie, and she ain't so nosy, but boy, she's so cozy. Keep your hands off, keep your hands off, keep your hands off, keep your hands off, keep your hands off. You hear what I say, you know she don't belong to you.
From Saturday night to Sunday morning, some experiences are universal.
Black girl, don't lie to me. Tell me, where did you sleep last night? In the pines, where the sun never shines. I was shivered all night too.
In 1990, Seattle grunge musician Mark Lanigan recorded Lead Belly's atmospheric classic, Black Girl, Where Did You Sleep Last Night, with Nirvana's Kurt Cobain. The raw grunge arrangement perfectly evokes the anguish of the Lead Belly original. In some ways, it's not surprising that Lead Belly didn't connect with black audiences in Harlem. He reminded them of times they would rather forget.
Lead Belly, when he emerged from prison in the 30s, was already an anachronism in terms of African-American music. And so I think the only real audience for Lead Belly was white audiences.
Although commercial success was elusive, Lead Belly's legendary memory for songs made him a popular fixture on the lecture circuit at Harvard, Yale, and other colleges.
It's a quilt of American culture, sort of pageant of our history in those songs.
It was the bridge between that period right after the Civil War and then the 19th century through into the 20th century.
On a Monday, I was arrested. On a Tuesday, I was locked up in jail.
Before long, he was hosting freewheeling jam sessions with some of the most prolific musical radicals of the day.
And so Lead Belly found an audience with the leftist community, whether it was Guthrie or Seeger, and others who really sort of championed this sort of authentic style of African-American music making.
They had sort of impromptu rehearsals at the house, at the apartment with Woody Guthrie and Sonny Terry and Josh White and Pete Seeger. And my grandmother said that, you know, sometimes it would get on her and Aunt Martha's nerves, and they would kick these people out and tell Lead Belly, you know, they got to go home.
One of the new young musicians on the scene was Tom Paley, who would go on to be a founding member of the new Lost City Ramblers in the 1958 folk revival.
I got to be fairly regular at Woody's place. Somehow that ended up with our having sessions over at Lead Belly's place. This is in Midtown Manhattan. At those sessions, Lead Belly was always immaculately dressed, and he'd have a bow tie and a vest, or what you call a waistcoat.
Pete Seeger told me that while him and Josh White and Woody Guthrie were wearing jeans and T-shirts and shirts, trying to represent the common man, Lead Belly had the striped suits and the bow ties.
There is a pride that I see in those clothes he wears. I don't care what you wear. This is what I'm gonna wear, because this is the me that I've been working on all my life.
Lead Belly's family have carefully kept some of his favorite items.
Here's some of the ties that Lead Belly wore, which is indicative of him being such a sharp dresser that we've known about. In a lot of the pictures, you see him in a suit and tie. He liked to keep a handkerchief on him, nice polka dots.
He was quite stylish.
The image of Lead Belly himself was intriguing. I mean, he was a strong man, and I remember the image of him with a bow tie and the sharp suit and all that, and he was a full package.
We all were, at least to some extent, in awe of him. We all regarded him as a great practitioner of folk music, but someone with his roots in it being real. He was always a good host and friendly in a slightly formal way. It wasn't that everything we played was Lead Belly stuff.
Tom still keeps some of those songs he played for Lead Belly in his repertoire.
Here's West Fork Girls. I felt that he was a creative person, someone who, although the songs he sang were probably mostly thoroughly traditional, somehow he gave them something extra. He put a personality into them somehow.
Lead Belly's music, it mapped out a road for artists to express sort of the deeper qualities of human emotion into their songs. It also gave voice to themes of solidarity, of protest in music.
In the late 1930s, Lead Belly and Martha were turned away from a rooming house in Washington, D.C.
Listen, young people, listen to me.
The landlord got upset because there was a black guy in his house, you know, and they had a hard time finding any place for Lead Belly to stay. So then he went over to a place where African Americans could hang out, and the person there didn't want the white people in the house.
Lead Belly channeled his anger more constructively than he might have just a few years earlier.
And so with music, and especially like bourgeois blues, Lead Belly took a personal experience and he made a song out of it.
He was speaking to the hypocrisy in terms of people wanting to pay him to perform, but at the same time denying him basic civil rights.
The chorus states, "Home of the brave, land of the free. I don't want to be mistreated by no bourgeoisie."
Some white folks in Washington, they know just how. Tongue a colored man a nickel just to see him by, Lord, in the bush for a town. Ooh, it's a bush for a town. I got the bush for blues, I'm gonna spread the news all around.
Back at home in New York, Lead Belly was able to relax and enjoy his family, including his great-nephew, Alvin.
You know, we had the best babysitter there was. You know, this guy played the guitar, sang songs all day, and he was a lot of fun, and he didn't discipline us, and he couldn't get around, so we had a lot of control over him. A lot of songs were just made up on the spot. If one of the other children would do something funny and everybody laughed, he made a song about it.
Then, at the age of 56, Lead Belly was ready for a new adventure.
He loved Gene Autry. He loved the singing cowboys in the movies. And, you know, he wanted to be one of them. He actually traveled out to California in 1945 in L.A. and was trying to get into the movie business. He wanted to be a singing cowboy.
But the only thing was there's not enough black cowboys, and he was already 50, 60-something years old at the time. So Hollywood was not that attractive.
He had a number of cowboy songs, and he had that one song that he came up with out on the Western Plains, or it was also called Cow, Cow, Yicky, Yicky, Yay.
Oh, the hardest battle was ever on Bunker's Hill. Oh, the hardest battle was ever on Bunker's Hill. When me and a bunch of cowboys running the Buffalo Bill. Come a cow, cow, yiggy, come a cow, cow, yiggy, yiggy, come a cow.
Lead Belly was now 60 and had traveled from a sharecropper's shack in Louisiana to become the center of a musical circle that included Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger. He was happily living with his two great loves, his wife and his guitar. The benefits of celebrity finally seemed within reach when in 1949 he was invited to tour in France.
So this is the concert poster to his only overseas performance. He was the first blues musician to perform in Europe.
But again, the fates seemed to conspire against him. He was beginning to suffer unexplained numbness in his legs and was often forced to walk with a cane and perform sitting down. Eventually, a doctor diagnosed him with Lou Gehrig's disease. It was incurable.
For any individual, it's probably heartbreaking, but to him, and then see people looking at him not be able to perform. You know, most people go in the corner and nobody else knows about it, but, you know, he was, people's eyes were on him at all times.
Then when he got back from Paris, he did a concert at the University of Texas, where he was in fabulous form. The guitar playing wasn't good at all, but I never heard Lead Belly sound so happy in his life. He was fabulous, and the audience was with him, and he was great.
Thank you. You people are so good. I could sing for you all night, but it's coming time. But I have to close this time. I hope I'll come back again. I hope I'll be walking better, which I will. I'm going to either get better or worse. Irene, good night. Irene, good night. Good night.
In the fall of 1949, he was admitted to Bellevue Hospital in New York.
I met a nurse who had tended to Lead Belly, and she said he was the best patient she ever had. He was so sick, and his room was very neat, and some nurses would come from another floor to see this man that everybody was talking about. Lead Belly had great friends, and he was always telling people, you people are the best people in the world. Everybody loved Lead Belly.
Lead Belly passed away on December 6th, 1949. His family buried him back in Mooringsport, Louisiana, where he had first started his extraordinary journey. The New York Times obituary said simply, he was acclaimed by critics and untutored music lovers, a tribute to the universality of his art. Just a few months after his death, the Weavers, a folk group including Lead Belly's friend Pete Seeger, released their own version of Goodnight, Irene.
Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dreams.
It was like the hottest song in the United States that entire year, the biggest seller.
That was Lead Belly. He was a symbol of everything that people were questing for.
The song went to #1 on the American chart.
Into the river and drown.
Had he lived another year or another couple of years, he would have been a wealthy man and would have realized the dream that he was trying to pursue. So I think it's really a shame that he didn't see that.
Since the success of Goodnight, Irene, hundreds of artists have covered the songs that Lead Belly brought us. They continue to be played worldwide and to show up in surprising places like this pub in Bristol, England, where the local soccer supporters have adopted an unexpected anthem. Meanwhile, back in Tennessee, his family run camps to keep Lead Belly's love of music alive.
Ha ha this way, ha ha that way, ha ha this way, and there no spin.
The Lead Belly Foundation has provided instruments and training to hundreds of children and given them a glimpse of the legacy of a remarkable man. His legend lives on through his songs.
His life in its unfolding and its blossoming had a lot to do with the fact that he had music to perform, and he had something to say, and he said it. And it found its way to think of it, huge public. Millions and millions of people know about him. They certainly know, Good Night, Irene.
The idea of like a song living in the world and moving around the world, that's what keeps me going, and I would think that he was a songwriter, so it would have kept him going too. Good night, Irene, good night, Irene, when I see you in my dreams.
He must have been a very hopeful person, and I think that we need that now. And young people need that now, and I hope they find it in his story.
Lead Belly knew he was a star. He really was. There are photographs You can see him, and you can just tell. He knows he's something very special.
It's a man that came out of one bad environment and went to a better environment and made the best of his life.
It's just as strong today. I mean, it could be recorded last week to me. It's just as powerful.
He saw the value of human dignity in all of our relationships with each other. He had that sense of a bigger vision that we all should respect one another.
It's just so natural, you know. It just flows in such a beautiful way. It seems like it always existed.
Leadbelly was a fantastic singer, an instrumentalist, and a man who had traveled all over the western areas of the American South and absorbed all that culture and brought it and put it for white America on a plate.
And whether you're black, white, blue, or brown, if you listen, it resonates in a way that taps into something that is at our core as Americans.
Good night.